current Israeli prime minister, who is the longest serving prime minister in the state of Israel's history, is a master at division, not unity.
Yes. Yes. He is the single most divisive prime minister we have ever had, because he is consciously feeding hatred among Israelis for his own narrow political purposes. And we have never seen anything quite like
And
it.
if you could explain to the listeners, what are those narrow political purposes that Netanyahu is pursuing?
Netanyahu comes out of a political tradition that I know very well, which is the tradition of Beitar, Jabotinsky, and Menachem Begin, the right wing, what used to be called revisionist Zionist. And the revisionist Zionists carried a deep sense of grudge, even wound, because revisionists felt that they were the ones who really created the state of Israel through the Irgun and the revolt against Britain. And they felt that what should have been theirs, they should have been the rightful rulers of Israel in 1948, was snatched by the left, by Ben-Gurion and Golda and Eshkol. And so I say we, even though I'm not part of that camp anymore, but emotionally, I'll always be part of that camp. That was my formative Zionist experience. And so I grew up with that sense of grievance. We're the ones who threw the British out. We're the ones who tried to save the Jews of Europe. Jabotinsky was the only leader who tried to warn the Jews of Europe to flee in time, and no one listened to him. We're the ones who tried to arm the young Jews of Europe, and we were called fascists. And so there is this deep sense of rage that the right will always have toward the left. Mm-hmm. We were right and you were wrong. You were disastrously wrong. And it goes even deeper than that. There's this feeling that the left betrayed the right. The sinking of the ship, the Altalena, which was an Irgun ship that was sunk by Ben-Gurion, and 16 Irgunis were killed. Netanyahu grew up with that same sense of grievance with which I was raised.
From his father?
By his father, who was one of the leaders of revisionist Zionism. And Netanyahu feels, and he deeply believes, that he is being unfairly pursued by the left. The courts and the police, they're all the left, and they're all trying to bring him down. And he says it over and over again. The left can't defeat me electorally, so they're trying to defeat me in the courts. Now, when he accuses the legal system of conspiring against him with the police, it's a fantasy. The Attorney General is a Likudnik whom he appointed. The former chief of police is someone who lived on a settlement, whom Bibi appointed. So what you're seeing is the right turning against Bibi. This is not a left-right showdown. It is the right confronting the limits of power. It's the right confronting its own corruption and trying to cleanse itself. But Netanyahu can't see it that way.
So are you, and it's hard to know actually what someone is thinking, but do you think that his usage of this divisive historical grudge that the right wing has against the left wing in Israel, is he using this because he's in a denial mode about his own corruption? Or is he being Machiavellian in using the language to create the rift to protect himself, but deep down inside he knows that it's not a grudge issue?
I have asked myself that question many times. I don't know. There was one moment that I found really extraordinary. It was at the memorial this year, in July, a memorial for Bibi's older brother, Yoni, yes, who of course was the hero of Entebbe, the fallen hero. And Bibi turns to Yoni at the gravesite, and he says to him, at least you've been spared seeing what they've done to me. And I found that a very touching moment and a revealing moment, because the last sacred thing for the Netanyahu family, the only
Is
thing
Yoni.
that's still sacred, is Yoni. You don't use Yoni's memorial for political spin. And so I have to believe that Bibi really, really believed it.
A few weeks ago came the news of this peace agreement with the UAE, which made big, big news. And I was wondering if you could share some perspective to the watchers of this video, what it says and what it doesn't say. In other words,
Good
it
question.
can't be the great mounting of Everest that Netanyahu would like it to sound like. Yet on the other hand, it's not trivial either. Some Israeli political commentators said, what peace? We never were at war with them to begin with. That was a comment that was repeated very much. But certainly there's something important, both political takeaways and kind of an assessment of the world. And I wonder if you could share some things on that.
Look, this is the first peace agreement that really feels like peace. Our other agreements were so grudging. Egypt was never a real peace. Jordan, King Hussein tried to make it a real peace, but he didn't have the public with him. This really feels like two countries that aspire to normalcy and progress, and that are stuck in one of the most difficult regions on the planet, are desperately seeking each other's company and solace, and of course trying to do business with each other, which is peace. I mean, that's great. So this really does feel like the first peace agreement that we've. There's also a very interesting component to this, which is that when Netanyahu agreed not to annex parts of the territories, what he was in effect doing for the first time in the history of this conflict was giving an Arab country a say in our internal conversation. Now that's really something that we have never experienced before. And we now have a partner whose interests we take seriously. It's not quite a veto. We're not really giving them a veto on our policy, but we are giving them a vote. And that's a new dynamic. That's very exciting. You know, I've been experiencing something of this in my own work. I published a book a couple of years ago, you mentioned it earlier, Letters to My Palestinian Neighbor, which is a series of letters to an imaginary neighbor. And it's an attempt to explain Israel and Zionism to Palestinians, to the Arab world. And it was translated into Arabic, put online for free downloading in Arabic. And I've been getting hundreds of responses from all over the Arab world. And in the last months, I have found myself on Skype, on Zoom, with Baghdad, with Egypt. I was speaking to a journalist in Kuwait City the other day, and it just felt not quite normal, but it felt possible. And we are in potentially a new world here. So I see this peace agreement with the UAE as being far more substantive than some of our grudging commentators would allow. But where I disagree with Netanyahu and with the right is that this does not let us off the hook with the two-state solution. This is, in fact, I would say quite the opposite, that what this is doing is creating a potential infrastructure, a regional infrastructure for solving the Palestinian problem. I no longer believe that Israelis and Palestinians are going to negotiate Not going to happen. Neither side can surprise the other any longer. We have been through every conceivable negotiation. We know what the deal is, and we know it's not possible.
Which
But
is to say, if I understand you correctly, that having these regional partners that can bring people to the table and create guarantees
that's the
that they'll
key
be
word.
responsible
That's the
obedient to the
key word.
principles.
Yes,
Right.
guarantees. That it's not just Israel and the Palestinians. Look, what are the Palestinians? What can they possibly offer us? Promises for peace. Nobody here believes those promises anymore. But if you bring in the Saudis and North Africa and the Arab League, it starts to look a little different. It starts to be normalization with the Arab world. And so I see a potential deal as peace with the Arab world in exchange for a Palestinian state. Very
Well,
different premise than land for peace with a Palestinian national movement that we don't trust and have no reason to trust.
and from the opposite end, of course, for them, it is the recognition that they're at the end game, that there is
Yes.
nowhere else to run. There are no
Yes.
other options left on the table.
There's
For the
not going to
Israelis,
be it's not going to be a right of return
right,
to the state of Israel. That's a fantasy. They're not going to have the Arab world supporting their
correct.
maximalist positions any longer. It's time to make a deal. And if they
Those are
still say no, then I think one of two things will happen. Either we will all force Palestinian state on the Palestinians, or we will get the fantasy of the settlers, and nobody will blame us. Certainly not. I mean, yes, the progressives around the world will blame us. The Arab world will blame us.
The other deep passion of yours is Israeli music. And see, and we have a smile. And I wonder, as we're about to celebrate Rosh Hashanah, and many of us will not be in shul to hear the music and melodies that we're so familiar with from our childhood. Um, I wonder if you could share with our listeners what music, but particularly modern Israeli music, could offer them as we approach this holiday season, and maybe one or two suggestions of
Oh,
listeners,
terrific.
music
Sure.
they could listen to.
Truly, with pleasure. One of the extraordinary features of Israeli music is how intuitive it is to a given moment, a given Israeli moment. And so what you've seen in the last months is this outpouring of music in response to Corona, trying to figure out, what is this experience? How do we grow from this experience? And something else that's happened in Israeli music, as you well know, Aaron, in the last years, is a deep re-engagement with Judaism, with the sources of Jewish spirituality. Some of our leading musicians, Eviatar Banai and Ehud Banai and Yuval Dayan and Hanan Ben Ari. And
Barry Sakharov.
Barry Sakharov. There's
I
so
mean,
much.
of all people.
Really, our greatest hard rocker
Yes.
is now doing prayer. And
Yes.
so there's so much beauty, there's so much power that's coming through Israeli music, specifically in this time of Corona.
Listening for people to give them a sense of how music is important in all the moments in our life, and how music can transport us to understand feeling in ways that perhaps words don't, which is, I think, the reason why music is so important in so many areas of Jewish life.
Oh, absolutely. You know, the two great Jewish artistic forms traditionally are literature and music. And when you put literature and music together, which is so much of Israeli music, which is based on poetry, you really have a great art form. Maybe we can end with one song that we can
I would
call
love
up.
that.
Let me-
Yes.
So this is Hanan Ben Ari. It's called Gaguim Livnei Adam, longings for human beings. And first of all, you'll see the visuals are haunting. It's Tel Aviv and Jerusalem completely empty.
Mhm.
And he goes back to the biblical stories of the flood, the Tower of Babel, the archetypal stories of human arrogance.
Mhm.
And he draws a very beautiful and haunting metaphor for this moment, where he says, here we are, we thought we were this high-tech society, we could do anything, we've got social media, we are the pinnacle of human evolution. We don't need God, we don't even need other human beings. We're doing everything remote. And he says, and then Corona has come along as a gift to us. And it shows us the limits of human reach. And it has exposed human arrogance. And then he ends, and it's a song to Corona. It's a love song to Corona. And he says to Corona, he says, this is who we were until you came along and taught us. And he said, Corona, I have only one request of you, that when you leave, you will leave one of these days. And when you leave us changed. And we don't go back to the way we were.
Wow.
And it's so powerful. And that is so much richness in Israeli music.
Yes.
It's about something. It's even when it's trivial, it isn't completely trivial.
What's rich about Israeli music is that it's in Hebrew, and for people who know and love Hebrew, we know that the words of Plato are true, and that is, Greek is the language of logic, he wrote, and Latin the language of war, but Hebrew is a language of poets, and there's a richness to the language and prophets. There's a richness to the language that creates depth in music. Yossi, I want to thank you so much for your time, my friend. It's been
truly,
a treasure.
Truly a joy. Thank you, Aaron.
Stay well and safe. And I look forward to more chats, God willing, in the future. And my love to your family.
Thank you. And to yours, and blessings for the year. To you
Amen.
and to your family and to everyone.
Thank you so much. Shana Tova.
כבר חשבנו, ניצחנו הכל, מגדלים בשמיים בנינו. בן אדם, מי צריך בן אדם? לא יבוא עוד מבול בימינו. לעולם, לעולם לא ניפול. תעזוב, נסתדר בעצמנו. חכמים, נכונים וצודקים, וכלום לא נמצא מעלינו. עד שבאת והדבקת ושיגעת והזכרת ובלבלת והבהלת מיד. איך החזרת את השפיות, געגועים לבני אדם, פתאום שורפת הבדידות, כבר לא תשים מפה לשם. כל הפארקים נעולים, חתונות כמעט בלי איש, כמעט איבדנו את עצמנו, כמעט הפסקנו להרגיש. עוד מעט זה הכל ייגמר, ואני מבקש אם אפשר, שבבוקר אחרי שתלכי לא נהיה שוב אותו הדבר.